is something that they tell you about in school. They always tell you, first thing, don't do it. Second, always tell someone if it happens to you. And they will tell you, don't listen, but they'll also tell you to remember every word that you hear. And you need to remember every word that you hear. Just in case, of course, one day, you have to go on record about it. Just in case one day, everything's all too much. Just in case, eventually, in the future, later. Then again, what really is bullying? Where's the line between something lighthearted and something hurtful? Where's the line between a silly joke and a biting tease? When does joking become teasing and when does teasing become bullying? Where is that line and why does nobody ever look for it? Well, oftentimes, when someone is bullied, they're unknowingly and albeit involuntarily being put into a box. Children, who are the most vulnerable, also tend to be the most impressionable. So how long do you think a child has to be in a box before they start to believe that they might just belong there? I'm not a stranger to this sort of phenomenon. It always starts in a way that's, I guess, not necessarily innocent. I mean, I guess it's the complete opposite. It sneaks up on you. And it starts in a way where you don't even realize what's happening until the walls start to close in on you, and all of a sudden, it's just hard to breathe and to see and to feel. And when I was a kid, I absolutely hated being put into a box. Of course, I didn't always notice it all happening, but when I did, I refused to let it. And I let that creativity, what I always loved about myself, take me elsewhere and let me grow, in spite of everyone and everything that held me back from being myself. I became larger than life, but a lot of people didn't really love that. My way of stepping out of the box was making art and making friends. Art had always been something I loved. There were no rules or no limits to art that tried to hold me back or chain me down. And when I felt like I had nothing, I knew I had creativity, and that was enough. And it made me feel like I was enough. And to make friends, I talked a lot and to everyone. And as naive as I was back then, I realized a little bit late that not everybody wanted to be my friend. Not everybody loved that I was so loud. Not enough people seemed to notice that all I wanted was for people to like me. They would say I'm kind of weird, way too sensitive. I would overhear people asking each other, why is she crying all the time? Someone might have said Aysa's kind of chill if my name was brought up in Truth or Dare, but that was just about the extent of that kindness. Some of the meaner kids would laugh when they heard my name. They would ask me to do these stupid, embarrassing things so that they could have a little laugh. But I never understood. I just wanted to have friends, and I was so happy to finally be included. And even if it stung a little, I thought that this is just what friends do. Tease each other. So where's that line? The one between teasing and bullying? Of course, everyone was there and everybody saw what was happening, but nobody ever said anything. I never saw what was happening back then. I was so young, but looking back, my heart hurts a lot for the little kid that got put into a box that defined her as everything she didn't want to be. And my heart breaks a little bit when I remember I felt at home in that box, because it was all I had ever known. I was in 6th grade when these kids, of course, began to mature, and when all of this began to lessen. I was still hurting, yes, but at the same time I was healing, and I felt a little bit free. And as fate may have it, I was also in 6th grade when the quarantine suddenly began. And it was like I was being put back into a new box after I tried so hard to stay afloat in that first one. Except this time, the box was bound by ropes and secured with a padlock. Nobody could go outside, sure, but to me that year was far more detrimental than just not seeing friends for a while. And if anything, I didn't have enough friends to miss. The last time I had actually made a friend before the quarantine was 4th grade. I was in a class with the same 33 kids, give or take a few, from 4th through 6th, and we weren't always very kind to each other, but they were all I had, and I let them define me because they were all I knew. And sitting alone in my room that first summer of quarantine, I thought to myself, those friends of mine weren't even my friends, and how much did I have left? So throughout the rest of quarantine, I didn't have many people to fall back on. I certainly didn't have a sense of worth, and I was not strong enough to fall back on myself. So the only thing I could fall back on was bad habits. I mean, there's still only so much room to think and do things and grow when you're stuck inside of a box. The start of quarantine brought forth what was probably the scariest chapter of my entire life. And I didn't even notice things happening until everything began to change. Till I had to go back outside again, and I had no idea how to act. Until I had to order food at a restaurant, and I froze up and I begged my friends to order for me. Until I had a Socratic seminar over a Zoom call, and I left that call in a panic. And until my teachers were just so concerned that I had mandatory scheduled calls with the IVA mental health specialist. Nobody saw it coming, no, but not many people important to me acknowledged it either. I was stuck in a box, and I was too afraid to ask for the key. And it only escalated from there. I would freak out watching a horror movie and be paranoid for weeks. And the gore would just keep replaying in my head, and a sick part of my mind would convince me that one wrong step and that would be me. My head became like my own personalized terrible hell as I became afraid to go outside even as the quarantine lifted. It's like the walls of that box had collapsed and I was finally free, but my mind wouldn't let me step out. And so I lingered where I was, in a very bad place. And there wasn't much inside of that box. I had 3 real friends whom I still love very much. I had fear. I no longer had that spark, and I just had no idea who I was anymore. It seemed like that creativity that I had been fostering for my whole entire life was suddenly a curse. Of course, I used to love myself for that ability to create love and life out of nothing but a thought and a feeling, but I underestimated just how much that could accomplish. It helped my mind torment itself with all those terrible images and thoughts and words. So that realization that my creativity, what I loved most about myself, was hurting me, made me begin to detest it. And that hatred spread throughout the rest of me too. And I thought what I'd wanted the whole time was a box that I could finally fit into, one that defined me. And I thought what I hated was being defined as something that I'm not. But now, I realize that I don't like being defined at all. I don't want to be put into a box, no matter how accurately it may describe me, because then it'll leave no room for me to grow. And even through all of this uncertainty, there was one thing that I always confidently knew about myself. One thing that was too big and too dynamic to be confined to something so small. And it is that I was and am emotional. To a fault, some may say. Of course, this is something I was shamed for a lot as a kid because nobody wanted to be friends with that little kid who was always crying. But I know that it's more of a blessing than a curse. I cried not only for myself, but for the people I didn't know. I cried for those around me, for animals, and for depressing newspaper articles that nobody ever read. I was so emotional as a little kid, and I was emotional as a middle schooler. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm still so emotional now. I think my days during and especially before that quarantine shaped me, even though nobody witnessed me change. Of course, I don't define myself anymore by what people see of me, or by what they don't. Nobody knows that journey, and nobody knows that I've grown because nobody really knows where I started, until now. I remember the very day and the reason I decided to fight back. I had entered my freshman year having made some of my best friends ever in 8th grade, hoping for some kind of fresh start. And it was all so wonderful and blissful and easy until I had this improvised, impromptu dialogue in my Spanish 2 class, period 6. I had my first panic attack after almost a year, and I felt like everything was crashing down on me again. I thought I'd gotten rid of all those fears, but no, I hadn't. They were still there, and they were still fresh, and they were still strong, because I refused to acknowledge them and to work on them, and to even to accept them. So it occurred to me that what I feared the most was a lack of control over my own life, especially after those terrible, uncertain months of the quarantine. I kept getting pushed into these situations that I was nowhere near ready for, and it terrified me. So I decided that the only thing I could do was begin to do things like that willingly. I decided that I would ignore all of those voices telling me not to, and I would step out of the box. Now I'm here doing just that. And as you can probably assume, I've been terrified of public speaking, which is also why, for a year, I was kind of debating whether or not I wanted to do this. And I when I decided to, I was still confused as to why I chose to. But deep down, I know it's for that little kid. It's for her. It's for the little kid who got shoved into that box because people couldn't handle who she really was, because people were cruel to her, and because she spent so long paying the price for it. It's not fair. It really isn't fair, and that's just the way things are, but why do we still tolerate that? The line between teasing and bullying is the line that we never drew. And why do we never look for it until it's too late, until we're far away and comfortable enough to say, I wish I would have noticed? Not everybody is as lucky as I was, and not everybody makes it out of those boxes that they're forced into. So if you're going to take one thing from this speech, let it be this. Think twice before you speak, and think thrice before you stand by and watch. Don't be the reason somebody has to fight their way out. And if you feel like you are stuck in a box, don't be afraid to look for your way out. It's a lot nicer here on the sunny side. Thank you.